Sarah Matthews had what many would call a perfect life. She was 35, married to a loyal, hard-working husband, Jake, and together they had two beautiful children, a boy, Ethan, who was 8, and a little girl, Lily, who had just turned 5. They lived in a charming suburban neighborhood outside of New York City in a house with a white picket fence, a well-manicured lawn, and a cozy backyard where their kids played every evening. On the surface, everything was exactly as it should be. Their friends envied them. Their family praised them. But inside, Sarah felt empty. Jake was a good man, a great father, a responsible provider. But somewhere along the way, their marriage had lost its spark. The passion, the excitement, the late-night conversations about dreams and desires, it had all faded. Their conversations had become transactional, revolving around grocery lists, car maintenance, and school projects. They still had sex, but it was routine, predictable, almost mechanical, a duty rather than a pleasure. Jake rarely noticed when she wore something nice. He barely looked up from his laptop when she left for work. And worst of all, he never asked her how she was really feeling. She didn't blame him, not entirely. Life was busy. Bills had to be paid. Kids had to be raised. But deep inside, she longed for something more, to feel desired, to feel seen. And then, one day, Richard Harper walked into her life. Richard was everything Jake wasn't. At 45, he was a man of power and presence, the kind of man who commanded attention when he entered a room. He was tall, fit for his age, with sharp blue eyes and a confidence that was effortless. He dressed in tailored suits that smelled like expensive cologne and quiet dominance. As the chief financial officer of the company where Sarah worked, Richard had a reputation: ruthless in business, charming in person, and completely untouchable. Sarah had worked at the firm for years, but she had never spoken to Richard much until one particular afternoon. She had just finished a presentation in a board meeting when Richard approached her afterward. "That was impressive, Sarah. Not many people can keep a room full of executives engaged like that." His voice was deep, smooth, the kind that lingered in the air like inexpensive whiskey. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had received compliments before, but there was something about the way he said her name, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long on hers. "Thank you," she said, smiling. "You ever think about moving up? A mind like yours shouldn't be wasted behind someone else's desk." It was a simple comment, but it stuck with her for the rest of the day. That night, while she lay in bed next to Jake, who had already fallen asleep, she found herself thinking about Richard. His voice. His presence. The way he had looked at her like she was more than just a wife and mother. It started slowly. A few more meetings. A few more compliments. A casual lunch at a cafe near the office. Then the messages began. At first, they were professional. Then they became personal. "Richard, late night at the office again? Someone's working too hard. Sarah, it's the only way to get ahead, right? Richard, or maybe you just like impressing me." Sarah hesitated before replying. But then she did something she hadn't done in years. She flirted back. "Sarah, maybe." That was all it took. The next time she saw him, his eyes held something different, a challenge, a promise. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Wanted. The first real moment of weakness happened on a stormy evening. Sarah had stayed late to finalize a quarterly report. Most of the office was empty, the halls silent except for the hum of computers and the occasional flickering light. Richard was there too, working in his office. As Sarah walked past his door, he looked up. "You're still here?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "Deadlines don't care about the weather." Richard smirked. "Neither do I." She knew she should keep walking. But instead, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The air was thick with something unspoken, dangerous. Richard stood, walking toward her slowly, his movements calculated. "You work too hard, Sarah." His voice was quieter now, more intimate. She swallowed. Someone has to. He was close enough now that she could smell him, woodsy cologne, leather, and a hint of something dark and intoxicating. "I think you just like the challenge," he murmured. She looked up at him. The tension between them was almost unbearable. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to stop this before it went too far. But then he reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her cheek. That was all it took. In one swift motion, he pulled her against him, his lips hot, demanding against hers. Sarah didn't resist. She kissed him back with a desperation she hadn't felt in years, her fingers gripping his suit jacket. His hands roamed her back, her waist, pulling her closer until there was nothing between them but heat and hunger. The desk dug into her back as he lifted her onto it, his mouth trailing down her neck. She knew this was wrong. She knew if she didn't stop now, there would be no turning back. But she didn't stop. She didn't want to. And as Richard's hands explored places that hadn't been touched with such passion in years, Sarah realized something terrifying. She didn't regret it. Not one bit. Sarah barely recognized herself anymore. After that first night in Richard's office, there was no turning back. The kiss had ignited something inside her, a hunger she had ignored for too long. The next morning, she told herself it was a mistake. She avoided Richard's gaze during meetings, kept her replies to his texts short. But resisting him felt impossible. It wasn't just about sex. It was about being wanted, being noticed. And Richard? He knew exactly how to keep her hooked. His texts were bold, flirtatious, daring. Richard, thinking about last night? Sarah, I can't do this. Richard, that's not what your body said. She hated how much she loved it. The next time they were alone, it happened again. This time in the dimly lit parking garage beneath the office. She had been heading to her car when he caught up to her, his fingers curling around her wrist. Tell me you don't want this and I'll walk away. Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because she did want it. God, she wanted it. Richard pushed her up against the cold concrete pillar, his body pressing into hers. Their mouths crashed together, fast, desperate, reckless. His hands slid under her coat, fingers splaying against her hips. Anyone could walk by. Anyone could see. And that was part of the thrill. After that, it became a game of secrecy. They stole moments in the office, quick, heated encounters in his office after hours, the blinds drawn, her breath ragged as he kissed his way down her neck. Lunchtime rendezvous at boutique hotels where they barely made it to the bed before tearing each other's clothes off. Late-night phone calls where Richard's voice was low, rough with need, telling her exactly what he wanted to do to her. And each time, Sarah told herself this was the last time. But it never was. Sarah knew she was playing with fire. The secrecy, the lies, it became exhilarating. Sneaking around made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Jake never suspected a thing. He was too busy with work, too comfortable in their routine to notice the way she started dressing differently, the new lingerie, the bolder lipstick, the subtle glow in her cheeks after a night with Richard. She became an expert at deception. Deleting texts. Leaving work late under the excuse of meetings. Wearing neutral perfume to mask Richard's scent. But no matter how careful they were, danger was always one step away. One evening, they were at a hotel when Sarah's phone buzzed. It was Jake. She froze. Jake, are you still at the office? Thought we could order takeout. Her hands trembled as she typed back, still working. Rain check. Richard watched her, smirking as he traced his fingers along her bare thigh. He has no idea, does he? Sarah swallowed hard. She didn't answer. The first real mistake happened at the office Christmas party. Richard had been more reckless than usual, his hand grazing her lower back too many times, his gaze lingering too long. And people noticed. A coworker, Lisa, raised an eyebrow as she whispered, "Something going on with you and the boss?" Sarah laughed it off, but panic crept in. She had been so careful. Hadn't she? Then one night, Jake found something he wasn't supposed to see. Sarah had left her phone on the nightstand while she was in the shower. When she came back, Jake was standing by the bed, holding it. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Who's Richard?" Her blood turned to ice. Jake's voice was eerily calm, but the look in his eyes terrified her. Sarah froze, her mind racing for a lie, something, anything that could explain why her boss was texting her at 11 p.m. with a message that read, "Tonight was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." Jake didn't yell. He didn't throw things or accuse her. He simply walked out of the bedroom. And that was worse than if he had screamed. The next day, he was gone before she woke up. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence. When she checked her phone, there was a single text. "We need to talk." Sarah's hands trembled as she replied, "Jake, I can explain." But could she? What explanation would ever be enough? Then came the real blow. A week later, Jake handed her a thick envelope. Divorce papers. Everything collapsed. Jake moved out, taking the kids with him. He refused to talk, to argue, to fight, as if she wasn't even worth the effort. Richard? He distanced himself immediately. When rumors started spreading in the office, he made a decision to protect his career, not her. "Sarah, this has to stop." "Are you serious? After everything? I have too much to lose." And just like that, he walked away. Sarah lost everything. Her marriage. Her children. Even her job. HR quietly let her go, citing company restructuring. But she knew the truth. They were getting rid of a scandal. And she was the scandal. Months later, Sarah stood outside her old house, watching through the window as Jake played with the kids. Their laughter filled the space she once belonged to. Tears blurred her vision. She had thought she wanted passion, excitement, something new. But in chasing the thrill, she had destroyed the one thing that truly mattered. Her family. Some mistakes can never be undone.